Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we're going over Atlas, and first things first, let's go into the builds. So with Atlas, I have a handful of builds, and the first one is an older build that was for pre-Debiri. See, before the new Incarnate weapons released, Atlas had a couple problems, and Strike was perfect. Atlas needed a source of healing, and Strike heals you on hit. On top of this, his damage wasn't the greatest versus Eximus units, so Strike not only kept yourself healed, but it also armor stripped Eximus units, allowing you to kill them with ease. However, now you have the Incarnate Furus, which is incredibly strong, and it has access to its augment mod, Winds of Purity, which gives it 20% lifesteal. This means that you're no longer locked into a helmet ability just to keep yourself healed. Not only this, but the new Incarnate melees also give you flat crit chance, meaning that your first ability, Landslide, went from a 5% base crit to a 35% base crit with a ceramic dagger. This means that you're on top of not being locked into an ability that heals you, you're also not locked into running combat discipline on plus Arcane Avenger just to deal damage as Atlas. So you free up a potential Aura slot and you free up a potential Arcane slot. And obviously, just having 35% base crit chance just buffs your damage massively. It made it so Atlas went from having a 50% crit chance with Arcane Avenger plus his base crit to being able to red crit with ease without Arcane Avenger. This means that instead of being forced to run an armor strip build, you can run a more utility-focused helmet such as Nourish. Nourish still gives you a slight damage increase and giving you innate viral to your melee weapon, buffing your damage from your landslide, but it also AoE spreads viral and gives you an energy multiplier, allowing you to drop Streamline from the build as well. I'm still running Combat Discipline to damage myself to proc the Nourish Explosion for added CC and AoE viral spreading, but I choose to opt out of using Arcane Avenger as you already have over 300% crit chance, so it's not really as good as it was before, though you could still slot it if you truly want to, but I found Multi-Augmented to be better, as it not only double dips on it double dips on both Landslide and Nourish. As to the build itself, I am just running high range for maximum AoE on Landslide and also for maximum viral spreading from Nourish. Path of Statues to keep my rubble up, as you need to have over 1400 rubble for Rubble Heap to work, and Rubble Heap is how you sustain and deal damage and maintain high KPM and endurance missions. You can opt out of Path of Statues, as this is just a quality of life mod, and if you drop Path of Statues, you will just have to cast Petrify more often to maintain your rubble. That is really it for the builds. There is a third build, however, and this is specifically for non-endless missions such as Exterminates. I don't have a helmet, and I did do a couple runs in a Daro on Sedna and Oshomoko in the Void, and the runs were pretty consistently around 3 to 3.5 minutes long, which isn't terrible, but it's not good either, and there's not a real way to speed it up too much, as Atlas is just kind of slow. I would highly suggest just subsuming Infested Mobility to give yourself a bit of movement speed and parkour velocity to be able to run through those missions quicker. As for the weapon loadout, I am using the Cedo for AoE priming enemies with corrosive and viral when running Nourish, or just viral when running a different helmet ability. As for my secondary, like I said earlier, I am using the Furus. This Riven is just a punch through supplement mod, so without a Riven, I would just run Seeker in its place for the punch through. The star of the show here is, of course, Winds of Purity for the 20% lifesteal, and the melee is just any Incarnate that has a flat crit chance buff. Ceramic Dagger is one of the best ones. Plus 20 initial combo and plus 100 damage and more initial combo, though you can choose to use the other Incarnate Evolution here, but I found that it really didn't buff the damage too much, so I was just using this for the initial combo. As the focus schools, I am using Madurai mostly for the 50% casting speed. Casting speed is very good on Atlas, but the 40% ability strength helps as well. Last but not least was the Panzer, and the Panzer was just a standard build, though you could choose to drop either Synth Fiber or Sharpened Qualls or Pack Leader to increase the uptime of your Panzer to minimize its deaths. One last thing, I forgot to show the build that I was running on my Ceramic Dagger, and this was it. Nothing fancy. Now moving on to the rankings, we're discussing Atlas in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly is KPM, secondly is Survivability, thirdly is Viability, and finally how fun it is to play. All of this data is sampled from a 1 hour solo Steel Path Mont Run with no Spectres, no on-call, and of course, no Archon shards. Now to get with the first topic, Atlas's KPM. Atlas is capable of very high KPM in survival missions. In fact, I've seen my friend do 1 hour Mont runs with the same conditions, getting over 150 to 160 KPM in his absolute highest. And in the missions I was doing, I was getting pretty consistent above 130. I believe in the footage that I'm showing, I got exactly 130 KPM, and the highest I got was roughly 140. This is incredibly high, even when compared to new power creeps such as the new Incarnate weapons with like Godroll Ribbons. Even they only get roughly 130 to 140 KPM outside of niche circumstances. So getting 130 to 140 KPM, even now with all the power creep, is very good. There are a couple downsides. One of them is Atlas's high KPM really only shines in survival. And other endurance missions, it is still okay, but it still does falter a bit comparatively to other options such as just using guns or other nuke frames. And in non-endless missions such as exterminates and captures, etc., his KPM is honestly kind of below average, and the reason for this is you don't really get to use his augment that makes his first ability deal double damage, have twice as much velocity, and also free to cast, as it requires you to have over 1400 rumble, and you can't really get over 1400 rumble in a non-endless mission unless you waste a lot of time at the start of the mission using your petrify building up all the rumble. But at that point, but at that point then you're just wasting time that you could just be going through the mission. So while he does have very, very high KPM in survival, everywhere else it's like in other endless missions it's just decent, like it's slightly above average, and in non-endless missions it's well below average. So I will just give him a A+ for his KPM, despite getting absurd KPM numbers in a survival setting. Now moving on to the second topic, his survivability, and there's not really too much to say here. His base stats are decent. They are worse than somebody's like Kalervo or Grendel, and shield gating on him is a bit of a nightmare as his shields are pretty high, sitting at 113 with a Decaying Dragon Key, and also that augment that I was just talking about that makes his first ability deal double damage and have twice as much velocity / speed / range. That makes your first ability free to cast, meaning that you can't shield gate with it no matter what. Even if you run something like Blind Rage, it's just free to cast, so you won't be able to get shields back. And he also suffers from the same bug that Excalibur has, where sometimes if your shield gate gets broken while you have the invincibility frames from his first ability, from landslide, or in Excalibur's case slash dash, if you lose your shield while you're invincible, because you can take shield damage while you have those iframes, sometimes you just lose your shield gate invincibility period outright. So even if you do find a way to run a shield gate Atlas build, sometimes you'll just die. So on top of it just not working well in general, it also has that bug that will just outright kill you. So you mostly have to look at just his raw health and his raw stats. His raw stats are slightly worse than, well, actually significantly worse than Kalervo's, and he also doesn't have an innate good way to heal himself. That being said, you do have a lot of iframes, as all you're doing is Atlas is spamming his one, and as you're spamming his one, you are invincible. This means that his survivability isn't as bad as it seems at first glance, and it's actually decent. I will rank him for survivability just a flat B, the same that I ranked Kullervo. Uh, Despite him having significantly worse stats, and you're still playing as a health tank, you do have access to all those iframes, so I do believe it makes up for it. Now, moving on to the third topic is viability, and this is where he struggles the most, as I've already talked about this a bit during the KPM section. Outside of survival, he's honestly kind of bad. In survival, he's actually really good, surprisingly. In other endless missions, he's just like okay. I wouldn't play him in a disruption ever. In interception, he might also be a bit of a struggle, as uh, unless you're at the point that has all the enemies, as everyone should know by now, like sometimes in interceptions there's just not enemies evenly distributed throughout the map, so it can be a bit annoying upkeeping your rubble in an interception. Kind of similar situation in defense, like in between waves you'll lose your rubble, but it's not as big of a deal there. But point is, and endless missions he's okay. Outside of disruption, I think he absolutely sucks in disruption. But in non-endless missions, he's well below average. Like pretty much any gun frame or any dedicated nuke frame, like a Mirage or a Saren or whatever, is significantly better than him there. And obviously, if you're talking about base star chart, it's mostly irrelevant, as any frame in the game can just run through a thermal sunder. And even in that regard, Atlas would be one of the worst, as he just has low base sprint speed, so he would just be slower than the rest of the frames in the game, other than Frost. But anyway, point is, his viability is pretty bad. Like, it's just, he's good in survival, everywhere else, not really worth mentioning. I will give him a D+ for his viability. Now moving on to the final topic of is he fun, and this is also a bit weird. So Atlas is fun, but also not fun. If you're only playing him in like a 10-minute survival, he's actually incredibly fun. It is super satisfying running around, just punching enemies, seeing red crits everywhere, just seeing random like 20-30 mils. It's actually incredibly fun. The problem is, if you're doing shorter missions, he's extremely annoying to play because you're not able to use his augment that requires the 1400 rubble. You have to like switch between your different builds. Like if you're doing a survival or something, like you use the survivability. If you're not, you have to switch to the explicitly exterminate build, like infest and mobility. You could technically make this claim for a lot of other frames, but it's not as major. Like with Atlas, there is a clear difference between switching your build specifically for like exterminate and survival, whereas like other frames, like I'll just use Mirage as an example. Like if I forget to switch to my exterminate build as Mirage, the only difference is I have to place a energy pad at the start of the mission. Like it's not that big of a deal. With Atlas, it will be significantly slower and it will just be annoying. And if you're doing longer missions as Atlas, I find spamming his one button to be extremely annoying, because at the end of the mission, I think it says like 3,000 abilities pressed, but that's not all of the buttons I'm pressing. Similar to Vauban, there's like a hidden number, and the reason is Atlas, I'm just non-stop mashing my one key even whenever I'm not actively trying to do it. And the reason for this is because the second I look at something, I want to instantly punch them. And there's also some weird line of sight issues with it. I found that after the 1 hour run, my thumb was hurting for a couple minutes, and I had to do multiple 1 hour Atlas missions. In fact, I thought I only had to do 2, but whenever I finally went to record it, I found at the end of the run I wasn't actually recording, so I had to do a third 1 hour Atlas, and every single time, after like the 20 to 30 minute mark, it was just uncomfortable sitting there spamming my one button. Because that's realistically, as Atlas, that really is all you're doing. It's just 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1. Like that, literally that quickly too. And even that might be not as quick as I was actually spamming it during the missions. So he's in this weird area where in super long missions, like 20 minutes plus, he's annoying to play. And below 5-minute missions, he just sucks in those missions anyway, like Exterminator or whatever. So it's like, he's in this weird limbo where if you're only doing like a 10 to 20 minute mission, he's incredibly fun, but anything shorter, he's not fun at all, and anything longer, he's really not fun at all. So for these reasons, I will also give him a D for fun. That being said, if I'm ever in a situation where I am just doing like a 5 to 10 minute survival, or like a 10 to 20 minute survival, I could see myself playing Atlas because he is fun in that exact scenario. But I will stick to the D rank for fun. In conclusion, Atlas is a C+ tier Warframe who mostly suffers just from having an outdated kit and augments, where most of the augments feel like they should just be innate to his kit or be less strict, such as the rubble augment that requires him to have 1400 rubble just for it to begin taking effect when his max rubble is 1500.